A good day we'll get 50 or 60. But it varies a lot.
The weather's getting better and people are, unmasking and stuff like that. So I think, don't be surprised if we don't get quite as many people now as we do when the weather's bad.
It's true.
Joe Biden is talking right now. So
Yeah, we're competing with Joe Biden.
Oh boy.
He hasn't got a chance.
He doesn't have a chance. He's
What's
not
he
the most
talking
dynamic speaker, but
I want to see Joe Biden. Bye.
She's going, wait a minute. She's leaving to so to see Joe Biden.
Okay, I'll get started. All right.
All right. I just one thing. I was listening to Joe Biden, and one of the things he was talking about was there's no reason why in the United States we can't make certain things that we're now buying, especially from China. And he mentioned in particular wind turbine blades. But I would think that if he was aimed at chips for automobiles and other things, that he would have the same attitude. No reason we can't do it if we want to.
Well, it's cost. Number one, it's cost for both the blades and chips. And number two, there is a whole DOD and a whole government push for trusted entities in the chip foundry world. Tektronix is building a whole new line. They're coming back to life because they can do it all in the USA.
Yep. Okay. Sorry for the interruption.
We really need to go there, though. You're right. We need to get something going on computer chips. So I have to talk to John. We know other people that do that stuff too. But for tonight, we're going to be talking about Neil Baggett. Neil Baggett has a BS degree from Tulane University and a PhD from University of Maryland, both in physics. After a decade of research in high energy physics in Germany, England, and the United States, he worked at Brooklyn National Laboratory, the Superconducting Super Collider Laboratory, and the US Department of Energy. Now retired, he recently served a 7-year term on the board of Tesla Science Center in Wardenclyffe in Shoreham, New York. He is a fellow of the AASS. So Neil, you're on.
Okay, I share the screen.
Advanced.
Wait a minute.
Go to advanced. Portion. There you go.
All right.
Well, do you see anything?
We see it.
We have hope. Let me say good evening and thank you for asking me to speak. It's my pleasure to tell you what I know, which won't take long, about Nikola Tesla, an enigma. I think he's quite mysterious. I don't understand him, and maybe nobody does. Something's wrong.
Tap on there and then do it.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay. Well, the longest slide is the first one. It says, who is this Nikola Tesla? He's an inventor, an engineer, two kinds of engineer. He's a physicist. I give him credit because he's always thinking about physics. He watches everything. He's a wizard. I put that in italics because he's an italicized kind of person. His family were Serbian, but they lived in Croatia. They'd been there for centuries. Been driven out by the Ottoman Turks. And so that's who he is. But he came to America and lived for a very long time in New York City. Became an American citizen in 1891. So he's became an American. He was there for a long time. He lived to be 86. He never married, bought a house, drove a car, played golf, and none of that. He lived single all the time and was really dedicated to his work. He's someone who really was. And I'm reading from his autobiography tonight. And I want to share with you something that he explains. He says that as a boy, he would see a vivid image of anything that someone mentioned to him, say a fiddle. He would see a fiddle and it would be vivid and there'd be flashes of light. It'd be quite a strong experience. Excuse me. He finally got used to that though. and began to enjoy it. And now he would say, well, gee, I could visualize anything. And he would travel, as he said, in his mind, meet people from other places, have conversations that seemed very real. So he had a vivid imagination. And I want to see, he said, when I was about 17, I observed to my delight that I could visualize with the greatest facility. I needed no models, drawings, or experiments he was trying to invent at this time. I could picture them all. A little later down the page, he says, when I get an idea, I start at once building it up in my imagination. I change the construction, make improvements, operate the device in my mind. It is absolutely immaterial to me whether I run the turbine, if it's a turbine, in thought or test it in my shop. I even note if it's out of balance. There's no difference whatever, the results are the same. In this way, I'm able to rapidly develop and perfect a conception without touching anything. But I've gone so far as to embody in the invention every possible improvement I can think of and see no fault anywhere. Then I put into concrete form this final product of my brain. Invariably, my device works as I conceived that it should, and the experiment comes out exactly as I planned it. In 20 years, there's not been a single exception. So I think that gives you a vivid picture of the point that this man is really something unusual. I don't know very many like that, and maybe you don't either. Let's say a little about him. His mother was Milutin. His mother was Juka. His father was Milutin. He was a priest. She was a homemaker, but she worked from 4 a.m. to 11 p.m. and did everything. He said she was very inventive, and her family were inventive. And I think we know from reading that he was really affected by his mother. She had a strong influence. His father did as well. His father taught him how to think. He gave him exercises to clarify his mind and make him make clear decisions. But we went to this museum a few years ago. That's the house and church where they were. There he is, wanting to be an inventor. And he was brilliant as a student. And he wanted to invent things too. He did try as a boy, a couple of his early inventions, a propeller powered by June bugs. That worked okay for a while, then he abandoned it. A parasol, boy could float lightly down from a barn roof. That one he gave up after a while. Tesla, as a young man, went to university twice. He went to a school in Austria and then one in Prague. He didn't finish at either one of them. In the Johanneum Polytechnic, he was in the class of one of his favorite professors, a physics teacher, and he produced a dynamo to the class and started trying to demonstrate it. I had a little trouble with the brushes and commutators, and they were sparking and wasn't working. And Tesla ventured to say that maybe it would be possible to build a motor that didn't have brushes. You wouldn't have that trouble. And Professor Herschel gave a little speech and said, "Mr. Tesla may accomplish great things, but he certainly never will do this." He thought it would be a violation of the conservation of energy not to have any resistance. Tesla took this as a personal challenge and worked on the problem for 6 years. At the end of that time, he found a way to make an induction motor. Let me see, he left Graz, enrolled at Prague, left soon after, never earned a degree at any of these places. Later, he got some honorary degrees. He got a job with the help of a maternal uncle, got a job at the central Budapest, at the central, what have I been doing here, Nancy? This is in the way, these guys. Nothing I can do, right? At the Central Telegraph Office in in Budapest. And one day while walking in the park with a friend in that city park, he had an idea that suddenly came to him of how to make an induction motor. He said, what you need is a rotating magnetic field. If the field rotates around the shaft, it will pull it along. And that's the simple way to put it. And he saw how he could maybe do that with phased currents in various coils. This was the key idea that he had for this motor he wanted to make. His uncles also got him a job in Paris, working at a company owned by Thomas Edison, who was setting up to build and install an incandescent lighting in France. And he did very well there. And so at age 28, he was invited to go to New York to work directly for Edison. When he arrived, this is what he saw: a level place with 10-story buildings. It was 1884. There wasn't electricity for elevators, so there weren't any tall buildings in New York. There was a very nice bridge. Can I do this? Here's the Brooklyn Bridge. That was an advanced state of technology. Here's the nation he reached. It had 38 states and some territories. It was 1884, and they still weren't. I thought they were all settled by then, but I guess not. The frontier was not supposed to be closed until 1890, so it's early days. It ended up being 48 states, as you know. What was the world like in the 19th century? That's when he was around. He was born in 1856. Well, a lot of things were happening. Ampere's law, Faraday's law, Maxwell's equations, very important. Electromagnetic waves discovered by Hertz, getting a little later. Now, after that, you begin to see hints of modern physics, X-rays, radioactivity, the electron, the first elementary particle smaller than an atom. Maybe it's part of an atom, but all we know now is it is smaller, something new. But Tesla is thinking about the current frontier, electricity and magnetism. And the innovations in that century, there's some significant ones. I leave out steam engines and railroads and talk about the electromagnetic ones. There's telegraph, telephone, phonograph, electric lights, the incandescent light by Edison in 1879. Electric power came along. Edison was lighting up a rich man's house in Manhattan by building a generator in the basement and giving him DC lighting. A little later, other things happened. When Tesla got around to it, we got an induction motor and we used AC for a motor. That was nice. It gave us a lot of freedom. The AC power grid showed up a little later, again, with the help of Mr. Tesla. Tesla, as I say, went to work for Thomas Edison in 1884. He worked hard. He always worked hard, accomplished things. But after about 6 months, he left Edison because they didn't agree. There's a story about a promised bonus that never materialized, but I don't know whether to believe that or not. Anyway, he left. Now he's out of the job, but two guys found him, named Vail and Lane. They hired him to build an arc lighting system in Rahway, New Jersey. Arc light is just a big lot of current, I guess, flowing from A to B, making light. Primitive. They had him to do the system. It succeeded, but they dropped him, kept the money, kept the stocks, left him in the lurch. And now he's out of a job. And by 1886, he was digging ditches. Probably he was digging ditches in Manhattan for Edison's DC current lines. I'm just guessing. He met a man named Alfred Brown while he was down in the ditch. His foreman knew a guy named Brown, and Tesla met him and realized that Tesla knew a little more than how to use a shovel. So he introduced him to his friend Charles Peck, a wealthy and experienced man, and the two of them decided to support Tesla's work on the induction motor. And so they did. They took him over to Liberty Street and found a lab where he could work. They paid the cost. They paid him some to buy groceries and let him work on his concept. And I'm skipping a wonderful story about the egg of Columbus. If you want to hear it, ask me later. He started in April of '87. He worked hard for a year. And by May of '88, he had actually obtained 40 patents on AC motors of various kinds and other equipment. Generators, transformers, I don't know what all. But it was a package deal. Once you had these patents, you had everything you needed to generate electricity, transmit it, and then use it in a factory to operate a motor. Because now you had an AC motor. So in May, he was persuaded by a friend there to give a talk to something called the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. We didn't have the IEEE. We were lacking an E. We didn't have an electron yet. We got that a few years later, almost a decade later. We had electricity. His title was A New System of Currents and Motors, Alternate Currents. And as I say, this was a blueprint for building a generator and transmitting it and using it. It was recognized by those present that this was a new leader, a new, very capable man. They called him an electrician. Let's see, here it is. Electrician, that means someone who knows about electricity. Within about 2 months, George Westinghouse bought all 40 of the patents. He had decided he'd like to try AC power. He bought all 40 of them and hired Tesla to come and work for him for a year as a consultant. The purchase was okay. He got a total over 10 years. He would have accumulated, did accumulate $100,000. And part of it is a royalty, $2.50 per horsepower for each motor. And so that is a pretty good package. You have an inflation factor of roughly 25 if you want to multiply. The man has a couple of $1 million. And so it's ditches to riches in 2 years. That makes him quite a different situation. He's able to buy a nice new shirt. Within a couple of years, a few years later, the power grid was launched. I mentioned that because it was quite significant. So he went to work for Westinghouse. Here's an ad you probably saw in Life magazine. Oh, they didn't have a Life magazine, Collier's, showing the two, the businessman and the genius. Look at this guy. He does look unlike us. He doesn't look like anybody in our audience tonight, I don't think. It's just an ad. Let's see. I'm going to fail to mention the War of the Currents. Okay, in the 1890s, I say a busy decade, part one. He was doing a lot of things. In the 1890s, to me, that was his most productive period of his life. He was very productive. What did he do? Well, he went to Paris. He could afford the passage. He went to Paris, bought a new shirt, and talked to people about new things like Hertz waves. Heinrich Hertz discovered waves in 1887, showed that if you shake an electron just the right way, you can make a wave travel over to some other receiver, and it could be radio or anything. That was quite nice. And they call them Hertzian waves. He invented what's called the Tesla coil. It was a resonant transformer, which gave you very high voltages with very high frequencies and not a lot of current without a core, a different way of doing things. I've told you more than I know about transformers. But the result is high voltage, high frequency. He invented tube lamps like fluorescent lamps, neon lights, and they were important in ways. Westinghouse called him in one day and said, you know, we had this financial crash in 1890. the banks have failed. My bankers are saying they can't support me anymore. I'm gonna have to make some changes if I'm to keep the business. And one of the things they insist is that I can't afford these royalties for the motors. So I would have said, okay, $2.50 is too much. How about $1.50? Let's talk. What Tesla said was no problem. Tear them up. I don't need those. I want you to succeed. He didn't worry a lot about money. And that year, he also became an American citizen. So some things are happening in that decade. Early in the decade, he gave a lecture at what's now Colombian University. I think it was fairly new at the time. And here he is on stage, looks like a magician. He's holding things that glow. There are no wires attached to them. He's got electricity in the air. He's got his Tesla coils making some kind of electric field in the air. And up here, he's standing between a couple of plates, and they're charged with this high voltage, high frequency. And again, he can hold these things in his hands are tubes that glow. So he's like a showman. If you think about him, he liked it that way, I think, to be dramatic. And he certainly got a lot of attention. He went to Europe and gave lectures. He went to America and gave lectures. All I want to say about these, he tells them all about his wireless lights and other things. But if you look at the thing that caught my attention was that he said motors might be operated at considerable distances. He talked about the effect of fields on the brush. In a Crookes tube, that means the electron beam. And it's very sensitive to external influences. And this anticipates vacuum tubes that come along later. So he has a lot of ideas all the time, and they often turn out to be important. But the thing I want you to remember is that he said, maybe we can operate motors at very considerable distances. In America, he talked in Philadelphia and St. Louis. He said we could, quote, disturb by means of powerful machines the electrostatic condition of the earth, and thus transmit intelligible signals, or perhaps power. Now he's thinking about sending a signal anywhere on earth and sending power enough to light your house or something. Because Earth's charge oscillates when it's disturbed. So the Earth's surface will be disturbed. You could draw signals or energy from these points. You would tap the planet for energy. In 1892, it was planned to have a Colombian Exposition. It'd be the 400th anniversary of Columbus' discovery of America. Of course, they were a year late. Things take longer. But they had it in 1893. It was a big deal in Chicago. At this time, Westinghouse won the contract to light the Chicago World's Fair. And he, of course, used AC lights, AC powered bulbs. Mr. Edison, who favored DC, said, not with my bulbs, you don't. So Westinghouse said, Nikola, you think you could gin up some kind of a bulb that would work on AC and wouldn't be in Mr. Edison's patent? He said, I got it. So they used his own bulbs and AC power. And a few other things were revealed to the world. Important things. Here's mine favorite: Hershey bars, electric kitchens, Ferris wheels, books in Braille, moving sidewalks. There was a lot going on in these world fairs. Here's the first Ferris wheel that we ever saw. I loved those as a kid. Here's the fair itself lit up now. It's a bad picture, but it's lit by electric lights, not candles, not gas lights, but electric lights. The same year, 1893, is the year that it was decided to generate power with Niagara Falls. And again, there were contracts let. Westinghouse got the contract to generate the power. General Electric, newly formed a year or so ago, including Edison, but other companies, was selected to transmit power. And they only had Buffalo as a target, so it's only 20 miles, but that's 20 miles. They began operations in a couple of years. They got up to 75 megawatts. And I would say the United States, the electric power grid, was born at this time. You have quotes from some of the managers saying, following the daring promise of Nikola Tesla, we will place 100,000 horsepower on a wire and send it 450 miles to New York. So that's the beginning of the grid. It was decided it would be AC, not some other thing. And that was followed by other companies in this country. And it influenced the decisions of Europe as well. Here's a picture of that power plant. Here's what the falls looked like in 1896. Here's what they look like now. They moved all that stuff out of the way so you could see this. Now it's downstream somewhere. And the water comes in pipes outside here. They take the water in pipes, take it away from the river and down to where it's needed. It still has the same drop. So that's the Niagara Falls story. I have more now, part two of the 1890s. What was he doing? Well, he used light from cathode ray tubes just for fun as a source of light to light a photograph. He had a lot of friends in New York, and they would come see him at the lab. He liked to invite them to show them what he was up to, and they would go. And some of his plates, they used glass plates in those days, had unaccountable marks and defects. He photographed Mark Twain, a great friend of his, with one of these Crookes tubes, and that was in 1895. They didn't look right, they looked wrong. But that December is the time when Wilhelm Röntgen discovered X-rays. That was a major advance. And Tesla didn't hear about that until a little later, but not much later. So the first thing he did early next year was take a look at his Mark Twain plate. And it had an X-ray image of the camera lens plus Twain. That's why it looked kind of bad. It had an X-ray image. So he realized these are X-rays, they come out of my Crookes tube. I could have had this, but I didn't. So he played with them for a while. He X-rayed his own head for a while. That might help us to understand his future progress. He also invented a little later the teleautomaton. This is important. It was a radio-controlled boat. There's always a war when he's alive. The war with Spain, I think. He says, maybe we can use this to control a boat that will go out near a battleship and fire a torpedo at it. And so that's interesting because it was remote control and it was based on radio. We're using radio now. Here's some of the friends he liked to invite. Here's Twain holding something that glows. Twain seemed to love this stuff. And here's J.P. Morgan, who gave him the money a little later. Here's Sarah Bernhardt, a very famous actress from France who would travel in the States and perform there. Here's Stanford White, the famous architect. We'll hear him mentioned again later. And here's John Jacob Astor, related to the Astoria, Waldorf Astoria Hotel and a family of origin. And Astor supported him at times as well. Since 1893, when he was talking to people, as I said, in England and in Paris and in Philadelphia and Salt Lake City, he had wanted to disturb the electrostatic condition of the earth and transmit either signals or power around the earth. He dreamed of supplying power to the world, maybe even free power. He talks about how much energy there is in the universe everywhere. surely we can tap that somehow and use an inexhaustible source of energy. To disturb the earth, he would need more space than a lab in Manhattan. How about Pikes Peak? A friend of his was able to find for him a place near Colorado Springs where he could put up a building and do some studies of electricity and the planet. So here he is, seated, if you could see, inside this, I won't say darkened room. It was dark until he fired up his coil. Here's the coil. It's got a primary, a secondary, and not much in the way of a core. And it gives you a couple million volts. And they will spark quite a ways. Some of them got to be long enough to set the building on fire one time, but they don't bother him. He's reading a book. It's enough light for him to read by. He reads by Crookes tubes or maybe lightning bolts. Of course, this is a double exposure. He hired a professional photographer to come out, take some pictures of his setup in Colorado, and use them for an article he was going to write in a well-known magazine. This is how you do. You do what you can when you're in the 19th century. You don't have the National Science Foundation or the Department of Energy or the NASA or any of it. There probably was zero federal support for research. There wasn't much. So you do something clever, you dress sharply, you look like a wizard, you make fascinating photographs, you fascinate a person with money. Maybe he'll help you. While he was out there, he applied some high voltage from this device to the ground. And he looked to see what happened out there. At 250 feet, he saw 1-inch sparks from a water pipe underground. He put 3 light bulbs in the ground about 50 feet from this building, and they lit up. I'll show you them in the next picture. No one else was with him. He had a tech. He would say, switch it on, switch it off. He would go out and observe. No one else repeated the experiments. I kind of wish he had published an article in Physical Review, which didn't quite exist yet, a peer-reviewed article, so that I would know who did what, who knew what. Because what he told us, he wrote in his log, was that it works. I can put power in the ground and it will travel very far. He convinced himself it would travel 8,000 miles if you go through, 12,000 miles if you go around. So we have to decide whether we believe that or not. But that's what he thought. He really did believe it, I think. Maybe it was true. Now he was ready to begin transmitting messages and energy around the world. In 1901, J.P. Morgan agreed to provide him with $150,000 for this project. Inflation is a factor of 25, so it's a fair amount. But the same year, Morgan bought a painting for the same price, a painting somewhere in Europe for $150,000. A little later, he bought an altarpiece for $400,000. And the same year, he gave Harvard $1 million for 3 of its buildings. So what he gave Tesla was a nice thing to help a bright young fellow. Maybe he'd be doing something good. It wasn't a contract. It was a gift. Tesla decided he would build the thing out on Long Island because he lives in the city and there's no railroad that goes out. Since 1895, there's been a railroad going way out on the island. And he could take it in about an hour and a half to be out here. This is Shoreham. It's where I live, by the way. I live about a 10-minute walk from where he built his tower. And it was called Wardenclyffe at the time, Wardenclyffe, because a man named James Warden, when he heard about the railroad, came out here and bought I don't know, 20,000 acres of farmland and started building houses for rich New Yorkers to go out and have a summer home on the Sound. Sorry about my voice. I seem to be losing it. Can you hear me all right, Bruce? Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you all right now.
Yeah, you're doing
You're
fine.
fine.
We hear you fine.
Coming through loud.
Are you having fun? Are you
Yeah,
all
we-
gone? No.
No, we want to know what happens next. This is
Oh,
pretty cool.
you hooked. I love it. Okay, he built a tower. He got a friend of his. He has friends everywhere in the city. One of them was named Stanford White. You may have heard of him. He became famous, but he did a lot of good work in the city. He agreed to build what to me a simple building for Mr. Tesla. Out here, we think it's an architectural marvel because he built it. But to me, it's a box with some nice windows. Not growing out of it, but behind it, pretty far behind it, was this tower. It looks like it's in the building, but it's pretty far away. If it fell over, it would just touch the building. The tower was almost 200 feet high. It was wooden because it had to be a good insulator. It contained a Tesla coil. You can't see it, it's not here yet. But it would be one of those resonant transformers he talked about. And it would provide a huge amount of current voltage maybe. And here you have a thing that's almost 70 feet across, made of metal, of course. It's just to hold a high voltage without sparking. That's how you do. You get a large radius of curvature and you can put more voltage. He would charge it up with this transformer. And he had a long rod going into the ground. And below the ground, it was 120 feet further down. And it was a good size excavation, 10 feet across, 120 feet down with stairs going down. And there was this rod. It went down to the bottom. It was a grounding rod. At the bottom of it were, I think, 16 metal pipes driven in stages 300 feet out into the ground, connected to this rod. Tesla explained, quote, "It is necessary for the machine to get a grip of the earth. Otherwise, it cannot shake the earth. It has to have a grip so that the whole of this globe can quiver." That's the way I think he sounded, don't you? That's how he sounded. He was exotic. This is the inside of the lab. It's of interest to us a little bit. It's a machine shop. Here's some electrical equipment, I think. Transformers, capacitors. The idea here is to make some voltage and send it out through a tunnel to the tower. And it would give us 44,000 volts at some kind of frequencies, various range of frequencies. Charge up capacitors. He would deliver 200 kilowatts of power to the primary coil in the tower. The coil and the Tesla coil would then produce a pulse of very high voltage, a few megavolts, I don't know how many, and send it into the earth through that grounding rod I mentioned with the 16 rods at the bottom to grip the earth and shake it. He expected to set up a stationary current wave in the earth's crust at its resonant frequency, which he estimated to be 6 hertz. Okay. To receive messages, you would either have another tower like that somewhere, or he said, you could have something smaller. He said with a ground wire and a small elevated terminal, he could illuminate lamps or call mom from home. He said you'd have something in your pocket that would, well, let me read you the next one and see what it says. He says, quote, "When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole earth will be converted into a huge brain, which in fact it is, all things being particles of a real and rhythmic whole. We shall be able to communicate with each other instantly, irrespective of distance. Not only this, but through television and telephony, we shall see and hear one another as perfectly," he's talking about television now, "as perfectly as though it were face to face. Despite intervening distances of thousands of miles, and the instruments through which we shall be able to do this, it says should say this, will be amazingly simple compared with our present telephone. A man will be able to carry one in his vest pocket. Now, that's a wonderful description of a cell phone, but he would send it through the crust of the earth. The man had vision. Whatever he might have had, he did not lack for confidence and vision. I think it's worth something to have that. I think about Einstein. Einstein did a lot when he was 26 years old. He wrote 5 papers, great consequences, relativity and quantum mechanics. And then he did a few other things, got general relativity in the next 10 years. And then he spent 30 or 40 years working on a unified field theory that never got anywhere. But I don't care. The man was great. He did some great things, and he had vision. He wanted to unify electromagnetic and other forces, gravity, if he could. So a thing happened that surprised Tesla. Tesla was thinking cell phone. He was talking about sending power through the earth and sending information. And suddenly, while he was thinking about all this, Marconi transmitted 3 letters across the Atlantic in December of 2001, and radio was born. And of course, that's the way to do it, through the air, not through the ground, with a balloon and a wire, not a tower and a huge shaft in the ground. But of course, it would be appealing if something could just go around the surface of the earth, but it's got to work. This we know works. Tesla was skeptical about Hertzian waves because he believed correctly that they would be emitted and travel in a straight line. Why would they go where you wanted? They go out in space. He didn't know about channeling between the earth and the atmosphere. Nobody knew about that. It was luck that got it across the Atlantic. But anyway, he wrote right away to J.P. Morgan saying, let's have a real world telegraphy system. We'll transmit it to individuals. We can select a channel and transmit it to a certain private message to a person. Morgan was doing other things, forming railroad trusts. He wouldn't invest in this project, but he did do one other thing. He did help Tesla to plan for a new company to be capitalized at $10 million. And that was nice, but nobody bought any shares. So it failed. Tesla kept saying, let's do this. It'll cost a little more, but it'll be wonderful. Morgan said, read my lips, no. And finally, he said no in a convincing way in 1903. Tesla switched on this tower. He hadn't done that before. He switched it on, which emitted lightning bolts that were seen from Connecticut, 20 miles away. One of you is from Connecticut. Bruce, I think you would perhaps have remembered if you had seen it back in 1903. Tesla looked for other people to sponsor him. He spent his own money. He went broke, spending everything he had. He mortgaged his Wardenclyffe property. Remember, he had 200 acres. I don't know if I mentioned that. A man named James Warden, for whom this place is named, gave him 200 acres. So he had land. He mortgaged all of it, the building, the land. It was not enough. His patents expired 17 years. It's 1905. His patents ran out. His income ran out. He tried to invent things. How do you make money? You invent something. He tried all kinds of things, but never found a big success that would bring a lot of money. The mortgaged land was foreclosed, and the tower was sold for scrap. He went bankrupt in 1916, I think, and the tower was sold for scrap in 1917. I should mention that he would have had better luck from Mr. Astor, but Mr. Astor went down with the Titanic in 1912. And so the Waldorf Astoria was inherited by a man named Bolt, who didn't care a damn about Tesla. Forgive my French. I've been trying to learn French in my spare time. Next is a picture of the tower going down on the 4th of July, 1917. It was decided to knock this down. It took about a month to get it down with dynamite. But down it went, and it was sold for scrap, and they realized $1,750, but you get to multiply by 25. Tesla's final years, he went back to Manhattan. This is 1917 or whatever it is. And he lived in the New Yorker Hotel. He had moved now from Waldorf Astoria to the New Yorker, a nice place. Lived his last years there. He continued to work on ideas. He often had a press conference on his birthday. The popular press loved him because he was always good for a story. He had some exciting new idea. One time it was a weapon, a particle beam weapon, maybe protons. It would protect the coast, destroying any ship that got within 100 miles with this beam. Near Bryant Park was near his hotel. He spent time out there. He became fond of the pigeons and took care of them when they were hurt, take them to his room and get them well. One of them was hurt and became a special friend, a white pigeon. And then he died. He died in 1943. What did he accomplish? He accomplished, I'll make a short list. He had a couple hundred patents. AC motors and AC power grid, to me, that's the most important. Neon and fluorescent lights, they were pretty good. He had a lot to do with radio. He was telling us in 1893 how to transmit it, pick it up. He wasn't thinking so much about that because that was just Hertzian waves. They just were mostly energy loss. But he did something about that. He did contribute to it. It's a long story. That's another story. But he did have contributions to radio. He did this remote control thing. It led people to think of how to do robots. He did a lot of early things that led you places. He worked on a bladeless turbine, which turned out to be useful for a flow meter, speedometer, odometer. It's a little thing with a lot of blades. You put a fluid in somewhere. It's a long story. But then he spent a long time, as we just heard, trying to send power and information worldwide without wires. And that didn't work out so well. What was he like? Here's a picture of him. He's beautiful. He's 6'4". He weighs 141 pounds. Sometimes it was 140. Sometimes it was 142. Oh, it says 142. Sometimes it was 148, 143. It didn't vary by more than a pound in about 40 years, most of his adult life. He was in New York 48 years. And most of that time, he didn't change weight. He counted the peas on his plate. He was careful. He didn't earn any degrees, but he got 12 honorary degrees, including Columbia and Yale. He spoke 8 languages, several Croatian, Italian, Spanish, French, English. I can't remember what they all are. He could remember a large part of a book. He was remembering something from Goethe's Faust when he had that inspiration about the induction motor in the park. He had hang-ups. He didn't like to touch your hair or shake your hand. Didn't like pearls. He didn't like numbers divisible by 3. He worked almost all the time. He slept a couple hours now and then. He walked every day a long way. He would work from morning until a long time. At dinner time, he would go to Delmonico's, a fine restaurant in New York, I'm told. And there he would be served only by the head waiter. He required 18 cloth napkins at his place for each meal to clean the silverware individually, carefully. He'd work all day, go back to the lab, work till about 3 a.m. and do it again. So interesting man. Peerless and Agfa. Now we're past him. This is his lab, and that's the chimney on top. And what happened? When the land was foreclosed, mortgage was foreclosed, and Tesla lost all the land. It was acquired by someone who sold it to an outfit who sold it to Peerless Photo Products, which operated as a factory for photo products, film and prints, for 30 years. In 1969, an outfit called Agfa, whom you heard about, that's also a photo outfit. They bought it and they operated it for another 30 years, or 20 maybe. In 1992, they closed it down because digital photography took over, and it went out of business. So now I have a lab. It's 1992. It's closed. You could sell it, but they couldn't sell it because they had put so much chemical waste out in the trench in the back that it was a Superfund site, and Agfa took a couple of decades to get it cleaned up to the stage where EPA would allow it to be sold. That finally happened in 2012. The site is now down to 16 acres with the lab and several other buildings they had added. A local group around here, led by Jane Alcorn, had dreamed for a while of acquiring Tesla's old lab and making a learning center to replace the one they had lost at the local high school. But how would they get $1.6 million? They were a startup with vision, but no money. Well, she thought of Facebook. You heard of Facebook. It has effects of all kinds. She ran across a guy named Matt Inman. Inman is a guy American guy who has a website called The Oatmeal. It's just a comic. You could look at it. It's amusing. Take a look. TheOatmeal.com. It's very funny. And he decided to adopt this project. He wrote a little thing on his oatmeal about how wonderful Tesla was. And he said, that's all. Raise some money and build a goddamn museum. Here's the banner. And within 9 days, people sent $1 million. The average contribution was $40. This was a truly global campaign. 30,000 people, 100 countries. It set a record at the time for crowdfunding. Here's what they bought. You can see from this fence around it, there's some kind of a building back there, but it's pretty well overgrown. It had been, what did I say, 2 decades? Here are some people who showed up the next day with a shovel, a rake, an axe, and they're cleaning up the property. Volunteers are a miracle. I discovered after I retired. I never knew they could be so effective. They raked, they pulled out weeds, they did everything needed until the place looked a little better. Right now, this is the inside of the lab. It looks a little bit messy, I would say, along in here. And there, it's the factory, remember, 48 years of factory, 50 years, whatever it is. And so that's what they acquired. This is an outfit called Friends of Science East, a little nonprofit that was set up. They had got the money through the crowdfunding. They had money from the state of New York. They had more than enough to buy the property and could begin to think about making a museum. Now you see what they did to the land. It looks a little neater. They planted, one of the neighbors planted a lawn here. This is the circular base of the tower. Maybe you can see that it goes all the way around. It's about 100 feet across. You can see a little of it right here. And that's pretty far from the lab. I always say if it fell over, it would just touch the lab. The lab's back there. Still in the same condition. We put bricks around it. Around what? Around the statue given to us by the Republic of Serbia. In 2013, they just told us with short notice, we're giving you a statue of Tesla, because he's our hero. And the President of the Republic was here for the United Nations. He came out and dedicated it. This all happened in October of 2013. I wasn't involved yet, but it was quite a show. Volunteers came out and cleaned all this up, made a nice place, and built this fence. And there it was, the statue. We love it. So what are we going to try? What are they going to try to do? I'm no longer on the board. I'm just a friend. But the center, Tesla Science Center at Wardenclyffe, intends to try to restore that lab to its condition when it was closed, first built, and put a museum there. We'll tell people about Tesla, about his inventions and his impact today. He still has significance for us. A learning center, that's what she wanted in the first place, for young people to understand and appreciate the value of science, technology, and invention and innovation. Create an innovation center to help startup companies, to help young people with ideas, provide a makerspace where a kid who wants to try something can come over and try it. So that's, to my mind, and theirs, the basic idea. Now, here's something that might amuse you. In 2013, not long, about the time that statue went up, a race was conducted by Car and Driver magazine. I don't know if you like cars. They decided to have a trial of the Tesla Model S, the sedan, and they would do that by racing it against a 1915 Ford Model T. It's about a century apart, different technologies. They had different advantages, pros and cons. The Tesla was fast, but it has to stop every now and then and charge for some hours. Meanwhile, the Model T is slow, but it keeps putting along. Get a refill anywhere, it just keeps going. Its speed was supposed to be 40 miles an hour. I think something happened to it and it went a little faster. One of those accidents that can happen in Detroit. Didn't go very fast, but it was a close race. And it turned out to be resolved. Modern technology was superior. Here they are looking very happy, but they lost the race by an hour and 10 minutes. The Tesla got there an hour and 10 minutes sooner than the Model T. This is a matter of 600 and something miles, a couple of days. Quite a contest. I'm happy about it. If you'd like to know more, it's a wonderful story in the magazine. You can read it in the February 2014 issue of Car and Driver. You might like to do that. Here's another event that happened the next year. There's something called a Tesla Auto Owners Club. And they do things. They have little excursions. They say, oh, let's go to Washington. And they all drive down to Washington for the day, 2 days. Or let's go somewhere else. They decided they'd go here. That's the Science Center. They'd come here. More than this, about 24 showed up. And they were here for a day. And they came over and they helped us clean up brush. We were cleaning up the property. They helped. Very nice. And here's a few of them parked by the lab. So now I'm getting where I can't work this thing. I'm getting down toward the end of the talk. No idea what time it is, but it's about right. Here's the tower base I mentioned. Here's where the tower went up. There's an octagon, and it went up 187 feet, made of wood, very strong. You see where a bolt used to be. And there's the lab behind, and like that. Here's the statue I mentioned, seen from here. There were brick pavers. We sold people for $125, sell you a brick, put your name on it, write anything that's not too bad on it, what you'd like to remember, what you'd like to say. Here's another picture of it. And of these bricks, some had various inscriptions. Here's one I like. It says, Melissa Hinckley, will you marry me? Kevin Hansen. We believe that Kevin put some leaves over this before Melissa arrived. He knelt down and swept off the leaves that obscured her view, and still on his knees, asked her to read the brick. What we do know is that she said yes. I think it's a nice story. There are two of these, not just one. I don't know if they came here to get married, but it would be a nice place for people to get married. If you want to know more about the Tesla Science Center, I should say at Wardenclyffe, here's some numbers. I don't know if you can get this to them, Bruce, but here is the phone number, and this email is probably Tesla Science Center info at TeslaScienceCenter.org. You can almost remember that. Website is something obvious. TeslaScienceCenter.org. You want to know more? You can. Let's see. Am I out of ideas? Do I have something else? Oh, there's some books and a movie about. Some of these books are pretty good. This one was written the year after Tesla died, but he was a fan. I've never read his book. Written by Margaret Cheney some years later, quite a few years later. Mark Cypher is very good. Carlson is very good. This is a late one. This is a real biography. These two are serious biographies. They all are. This is a special book about the myth of the lone genius. Quite interesting. If you care to look at these books. There's a film by a friend of mine, Joe Sikorsky, it's called Tower to the People. It's about Tesla and about us, about them, the Science Center people. So there's also a feature film called The Prestige. You might have seen it. It's about magicians. It's not bad. David Bowie plays Tesla. Maybe it's David Bowie. I don't know him. Here's a nice thank you for the close of the show. Picture of Tesla sitting by some kind of a magnet, looking special. Thank you.
Wow, that was great.
They all went to sleep.
No, they're still there.
Hey, thank you for the talk. I actually gave several $100s to the crowdfunding back in the time.
Oh,
And
did you?
At one point, there was a move to actually rebuild his Wardenclyffe Tower.
Yeah.
Is that ever, what's going on with that?
Nothing. Zero.
Zero, really? Yeah, same in Colorado. I was involved in Colorado trying to rebuild his.
Yeah.
When I lived
Why,
there.
why is there a museum in Colorado? You never.
I think, why can't I see any of these people? Any idea how I see people? Bruce, give me a hand.
Okay. Well, first you have to
Get him.
Oh, wait, here, I can see you.
release us from your
Only five
talk.
of you left.
Get your IT lady back, and then we can see each other.
Getting my what back?
Your IT person, your
Bruce,
wife.
I think
Oh,
you
Nancy.
Stop his share.
Okay, well, I see
Stop
some.
sharing.
By the way, I really think the bonus story with Edison was true.
There you go.
Edison, if you go to his museum and stuff, he has had the same story, albeit a different perspective than Tesla. But he does. Edison actually admits to the bonus story.
I see. The bonus was, if you do this job for me, I'll give you $50,000.
Right. He never did it.
Hell yes, he did it. And
Right.
he came back to the house. The bonus says, well, you see, you don't understand our American sense of humor. That was just a joke. $50,000 times 25 is a noticeable amount. So that's it could be true. I just don't know what to believe.
Yeah, Edison admits to it. Edison admits to it, but he has a different perspective on it. If you go to Edison's museums, and I think it's true. I mean, Tesla worked his butt off to get the $50,000 bonus, and then quit when Edison refused to give it to him.
Yeah, it could be true. What I try to do about this is avoid saying something I'm not sure about, because there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's a fascinating world. I've met people from here and there about this who are fascinated with Tesla. They're really fans, super fans. They're around from everywhere. I went to visit Serbia, the capital, went to the the president's office. He wasn't out of town, but there were two pictures on the wall. One was of Tesla, one was of Michael Pupin. So they love their Serbian scientists that made it big in America. So a man's name is on streets. It's on the money. The picture is on the money. He's quite a deal.
You know, the war between Edison and Westinghouse over whether or not we would go through to a DC system or an AC system was really brutal.
Brutal.
First thing of them was Edison himself, who would go around to try to prove how dangerous AC was.
Yep.
These electrocutions of elephants.
There was one elephant named Topsy. Yeah.
And then finally, he persuaded one of the states to use AC to electrocute somebody.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was such a disaster because they didn't do it right. And he sat there, the poor sucker sat there, and he was being more or less burned alive by the spark lousy contacts that they made. And it's boomeranged so badly against Edison that it really helped out Westinghouse and Tesla.
You know, it's a strange world. If you think about it, you want to use electrons to push things around. Keep it simple, have a direct current, and you understand it. The thing keeps changing its mind 60 times a second. Why would you want that? It takes some thinking to get.
Isn't it something about resistance of the wire or something too?
The thing is you can transform it up to high voltage. You get high voltage, you get low current. The energy loss is like I squared R. You want that low I square. So that's why it works. But now what you get is something that changes its mind 60 times a second. And how do you live with that? Well, you do.
Can I ask you a question? Do you understand the brushless motor? Because every power tool I have has brushes in it. And now they're starting to come out with brushless motors. Just, in the last few years, you can buy sanders and drills that are brushless. And, it made it look like the technology was new, but, you had these things back in 1800.
Listen, I can tell you very little because I know very little.
Bruce knows all about
Yeah.
Come on, Bruce.
Yeah,
You might know more.
maybe
about
we
it.
could do a talk on that sometime, but basically you have to figure out a way to commutate. And that technology is pretty easy to do now. So everything we had in our gimbals went from brush motors to brushless motors over time. Because
Really? Okay.
you don't get a spark, and you can't start a fire in there, and they last longer because you don't have to replace brushes.
Won't wear out.
Yeah.
My impression was that what Tesla invented had no brushes. It was just one coil circulating around another coil, inducing a current in the rotor coil.
What if you have a permanent magnet on the rotor with AC?
I guess you could. I don't know.
Yep. Well, yeah. I mean, there's just I just can't believe the guy got 40 incredibly significant patents in so many different areas in 2 years. He must have been just,
from April to May.
You want to study his brain, and how do people get that smart?
He's fascinating to me because he was a big deal. He was a superstar. Literally, they were scalping tickets for his lectures in these cities. They were charging a lot of money. He was standing room. And yet, when he died, and after that, he was forgotten pretty bad. He was forgotten partly because he was not like us. He was not some guy in jeans with a hammer at his side like Edison. He was exotic from Europe, well-dressed, not like us. He was not a professor at Columbia or any place else. He was not part of the club. He was not part of any big company, anything. He was solo. So when he disappeared, he just was forgotten. And he was not put in the textbooks. Steinmetz wrote a book about electrical engineering, left him out because why would he bother? So he got forgotten. And now he's being remembered again. He's come back in a big way. In 1960, we decided to name a unit after him. But not from then on, he keeps getting more and more popular. People like to discover a forgotten hero. People like an underdog. I don't know what's going on, but he's growing back.
He was quite a late man as well, and women really wanted to see him and watch him. Because he was handsome and tall, as you mentioned.
But that's what. That's exactly right. And Anne Morgan, Morgan's daughter Anne liked him. he was kind of in love with a married woman named Johnson. They wrote loving letters back and forth. He was in love with a girl when he was young, before he left Europe. He had a girlfriend, but something went wrong. They moved away. Something happened. It just fell apart. So I imagine him as a perfectly charming young man who would be a hit with girls. He succeeded, but it seems he decided he just couldn't do this and also work 24/7 on inventions.
He was probably gay
Neil-
because the gay guys getting it. All the girls like the gay guys.
Well, it could be a gay guy, but I didn't
Neil,
know. But
do you attribute this resurgence of interest in Tesla to the automobile with his name on it?
it could be there's a small effect of that. What is that, 10 or 15 years old? Not very old. I think it's been
Right.
going on. It's been going on longer than that. And to my mind, people love an underdog. They love a forgotten and mistreated hero, a saint who was mistreated. You see that going on all kinds of ways now. And that's what they love. And though if you find what they believe about him, it's stuff you don't believe. He was wonderful. He did everything. He was responsible for every invention we ever had. They overbuilt him. They want heroes. People like heroes. People are desperate for someone to adore and worship. That's my humble opinion from my non-scientific background. I think people like heroes. Look at the last president. There were people who were addicted to this man who could solve all problems.
Yeah.
Just saying. That's true.
And still are, unfortunately.
Still are around there. It's scary.
They're out there.
Yeah.
They are out there.
So people are hard to understand. That's why this was interesting to me. I didn't have to understand physics, just the person. And I still don't, but a fascinating subject, in my opinion.
I agree with you here.
Is there a man here who gave the talk on this already? Did you say Bruce?
It was John Miller.
Is he here? Is he around?
Yeah, he was the one that was talking to you a minute ago about.
Forgive me for not noticing.
Yeah, I'm on. Yeah, I've written a couple papers on Tesla. I've been a fan of his since the late 70s.
Yeah. What was your reason for becoming a fan?
When I was in college, I started to work at Griffith Observatory, and I had to give Tesla coil talks. We had a Tesla coil.
Okay.
And I've read O'Neill's and all his other biographies.
Oh, you did? Okay. So you just found out about him and he was interesting.
Yeah, and I tried to get a museum again in Colorado Springs when I lived in Colorado. All we ever got was funding for about 3 or 4 markers. And we figured out where his places were, and there was historical markers there.
That's nice. It's good to have something to. I had one experience with history since I retired. I was asked to find out how many scientists used to live in Shoreham, where I live. And it was a project I could find the last half century pretty easy, but going back to early 20th, it's not so easy. It's science, it's digging. So this kind of catches me a little bit. To find about somebody like Tesla and learn about him is kind of a challenge. Doug, what do you think about it? I know you're there. You look like Tesla. You must have something.
Matthew.
Go ahead, Doug. Say something.
As everyone doing today, really, Tesla is. So I want to go back to the car company thing because I think it's really important. And Tesla, the car company, while they bring attention to Nikola Tesla really stands by himself. By the time people figure out who he is, it's a captivating story, whether it is things that he did during his time frame or things that he did now that are impacting us now that were useless then, right? So fluid dynamic things like the Tesla valve that had no value to his society at that time frame, but is being utilized today in this age for things like cardiovascular heart creations or hydraulics and a series of different things that are really impacting society. It's just an incredibly interesting story from the modern day grid that he had created to items and patents that he has created that had no functional use then, and now have something that's really practical, coupled with things like envisioning television, envisioning
Yeah.
a device that you can communicate from a pocket in your phone, right? A phone that can fit in your pocket, and
Yeah.
intercommunications. And it's just truly a man of the future. And it's just a very inspiring individual. And as we build out this museum, it's very evident in the design aspect of what we're doing here is to make sure that we're consistently having a living legacy of Tesla, right? He very much deserves to come back to his museum, but not in the current moment, but rather continue to press and move forward by thinking about what's next. And that future is always going to be his, and trying to capture that moment. So just you know, I'm fascinated by the individual, and there's no person that I have met that isn't fascinated by his amazing convoluted complex stories of the individuals that were surrounding him in terms of stars and people, the wealth, the intelligence, just the sheer audacity of the individual, of the cardio exercise that he did. It seems almost impossible. It's inhuman to a certain extent. And you know, then you realize that he's got human flaws and
See what I mean
fundamental
about
things.
fans, guys? Fans. This is a fan. Yeah,
And it doesn't take much to become one. You know, there's a bit of Tesla that, whether you're a scientist or you're just you know, you're a cardio fan that just loves to run, or you're a passionate humanitarian, an environmentalist, you know, whatever it is, there's this little aspect that lives in many of us. So it's just such an easy person to gravitate towards.
Okay.
Well, thanks a lot, you guys, Douglas and Neil, for keeping Tesla's memory alive. And we look forward to hearing more. Maybe sounds like there's a lot of little stories in there that maybe
You
we
should
could
do your talk.
revisit.
Someday there'll be
Oh,
a
here?
story about the science.
Yeah. So I'm gonna call it a night here. Thank you, everybody, and Neil. Let's all give Neil a round of applause.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I really enjoyed it.
It's fun.
Good night.
Excellent.